Stay with us here on SABC News. Well, the South African Council of Churches is hosting and holding a discussion on the electoral reform for accountability, transparency and good governance. Let's take you there to listen in.
Shall the country surrender public values to the whims of politicians, regardless of the party or the leadership thereof? The view was that as long as members of the legislature at the national and provincial levels were only as answerable to party bosses and not directly to the electorate and the people of South Africa, there could be no public accountability for their decisions. And democracy was thus not effectively served. It was then resolved, and the churches endorsed this position in their governance structures, to advocate for electoral reforms that would make for direct elections of the president and a hybrid system with some proportional and directly elected candidates for public representation at provincial and national levels, with lessons learned from the local government experience to date as may be applicable at other levels of legislative election. This begs the question of why not extend the direct elections to the office of Premier and to the office of the city executive mayor. And this is where the 70s group have pushed the envelope further. All this was before the more recent Constitutional Court ruling was made on the eligibility of public office of independent candidates. Of greater importance to the SACC was the recommendation of the high-level panel led by President Motlanthe on electoral reform. And we look forward to hearing from both Mr. Motlanthe and Mr. Lawson how those recommendations, together with the recent ruling on independent candidates, inform what we should be doing in our advocacy going forward. Again, from our viewpoint, it still remains the question of how the electoral system ensures that we do deliver on the promise of the post-apartheid South Africa, how we ensure that there is justice, and that we are a peaceful society with equitable basis, and how we can ensure that neither racism nor tribalism defines, or gender prejudices define how we shall be governed in our society. And the less power you have for the party bosses that determine who comes in, the better, we believe, for our democracy. This webinar must necessarily be just the first public engagement on this matter, to be followed by a variety of other public processes that allow for more South Africans to express their minds. I trust that this modest beginning will help set the ball rolling. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Bishop Mpumalwana. Our next speaker has no need for introduction, but I will introduce him. He has been a bandit of the 3 presidents of the 5 presidents South Africa has had. 3 have been prisoners on Robben Island, and our 3rd president in a democratic South Africa is Kgalema Motlanthe, who will address us on the key findings from that commission that bears his name. Over to you, President.
Thank you very much, Prof. And greetings to the Bishop, as well as Lawson and all the guests and participants in this webinar. Mine is to share with you the recommendations of the high-level panel on the assessment of key legislation and the acceleration of fundamental change. The high-level panel took note of the brief historical evolution of and development of our electoral legislation. From the interim constitution, which basically provided for proportional representation system of election for the National Assembly as well as the legislatures of the 9 provinces in 1994. And subsequent to those elections, the Electoral Act was passed by Parliament. That's Electoral Act number 73 of 1998, which also retained the proportional representation system for National Assembly, the National Council of Provinces, as well as the 9 provincial legislatures. And this act was amended in 2003 following the passage of Local Government Municipal Electoral Act number 27 of 2000. And it is through this act that at local level we have a hybrid system of constituency-based elections, that is ward-based elections, as well as proportional representation. So in a sense, we have 2 systems. At national and provincial level, it is the proportional representation system, and that obtains, and at local level, it's a hybrid system. Now, in 2002, Cabinet established a task team led by the late Dr. F. van Zyl-Slabbert to literally draft new electoral legislation as required by the Constitution of the Republic. It is this electoral task team led by van Zyl-Slabbert, which, having observed the shortcomings of the proportional representation system, basically submitted a report. There was a majority view as well as a minority view. I'm just going to share with you the majority view because even though the cabinet at that time did not endorse and adopt this majority view, but it contained practical and important recommendations. Essentially, the recommendation was that the country should be demarcated into 69 constituencies, and that each constituency would be a multi-member constituency. In other words, a minimum of 3, perhaps maximum of 7 could be elected from a constituency, depending on the number of voters in that constituency. And the idea was that of the 400 members of parliament, 300, the first 300 should be elected through this model of multi-member constituencies. And the remaining 100 would still be on the basis of closed lists put together by political parties contesting elections. And the idea of the this ETT, Electoral Task Team, was that this model is important because it addresses the weaknesses in the proportional representation system, which basically leaves the public representatives or members of parliament accountable to their parties as well as the leadership of their parties. All of this in spite of the wonderful oaths and solemn affirmations contained in the Constitution of the Republic, Schedule 2, which each member, affirms to or takes an oath ministered by the Chief Justice or a judge designated to play that role. And in it, essentially, all members swear allegiance to the Constitution of the Republic. But there's a problem here in the sense that the individual parties are not, there's no requirement when they register to contest elections that their constitution should be aligned to the Constitution of the Republic in a manner which makes the supremacy of the Constitution of the Republic very clear, so that this oath which each new member of parliament takes, and as well as the president, as well as the acting president or deputy president, as well as ministers and deputy ministers and premiers in provinces, they all take an oath or a solemn affirmation. In spite of this, the reality of it is that the provisions of the Constitution of the Republic are trumped by the constitutions of political parties which contest elections. This misalignment creates a lacuna or a gap that allows for the leadership of the political parties and the political parties to essentially get their members who are public representatives, who are members of parliament, to act in knowingly so against the provisions of the Constitution of the Republic. This is some lacuna which also needs to be addressed if we are to have, members of parliament or public representatives held accountable by the electorate and constituencies that they represent. With this proportional representation system, there was a recognition that there's need for constituency offices to be established and allocated to various parties. And that was done, and it was, provided with the requisite resources. However, the reality is that there is no direct accountability to the electorate. These constituency offices, tend to serve those who want to align themselves with party, rather than to serve the people of South Africa and communities in an unbiased fashion. So there's a weakness there, and cabinet itself recognized that there is a weakness in terms of contact, dynamic contact with the electorate and communities in the various parts of the country. And that is why, specifically under the presidency of President Mbeki, cabinet from time to time held what was known as Izimbizo. This was, in a sense, to try and have direct contact with the communities who had the right to raise whatever issues, burning issues that confronted them, because cabinet, in a sense, went to these imbizos with various departments mobilized to respond promptly to any issues that communities or participants in those imbizos would be raising. This is also recognized, this weakness is also recognized by the National Council of Provinces, which has a practice of what they call taking parliament to the people. So once a quarter, they go to one part of the country and they spend a week in that part of the country. They fan out and for a week, interacting with sections of the communities in that particular area. And all that culminates in a plenary session where, members of communities are given the opportunity to raise issues, and members of the NCOP are also given the opportunity to raise issues that they would have collected from their interaction with households in that particular area. But all of this is clearly inadequate in terms of ensuring that the electorate participates not only in elections, but on an ongoing basis to hold public representative accountable. And because, generally speaking, people do not only have concerns, they also have suggestions. And half the time, their suggestions are pretty practical, as it were. I'm raising this because I think it's pertinent to the issues we're discussing, which essentially deal with the weaknesses of and challenges of the current electoral system of PR, proportional representation. And of course, at local level, the hybrid system is also not working as effectively as we would have expected it to do. In some areas, if you go into a ward, you find that there are residents who reside within that ward who are not even aware who their councillor is. Both the ward councillor and the PR councillors. So I think we need to drill a little bit deeper into how best hybrid system can be improved, so that when as the high-level panel recommended that Parliament should amend the Electoral Act to provide for an electoral system that makes members of Parliament accountable to defined constituencies on a proportional representation and constituency system for national elections. So that was the recommendation of the high-level panel. But I'm also just adding that we need to also, look into this proportional representation system, a constituency-based system, and
all right, that is the current webinar on at the moment on electoral reform for accountability, transparency and good governance as we head into an election year ourselves next year. I know a lot of us have been paying attention to what's going on in the US, but certainly we should also be paying attention to what's going on here in our own country. Former President Kgalema Motlanthe speaking there, having his say on the issue and the fact that the electoral task team is dealing with proportional representation system. We'll certainly get more information on all of this as, of course, we lead up into those elections. Let's take a short break. More news at the top of the hour.